welcome to The Skinny for Friday, April 18th. I'm Mitch Perry, the senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix, joining you live back in the studio here in WMNF with my colleague Ray Roa. Good morning, Ray.
Welcome back, Mitch. It's good to see you, man. You're looking great. It looks like Tallahassee has invigorated you even more.
Well, it's been a very intense 7 weeks. We're at the end of the 7th week of the 9-week legislative session. I'm back because, not necessarily because of Easter, I actually had a dental implant issue I had to deal with yesterday, so I'm here for the weekend, going back to Tally on Monday. We've got a great show today, a lot going on here. Thank you so much for joining us here. We're going to have, in a few minutes, talk to a local businessman here in Tampa who's dealing with the chaotic economic situation vis-a-vis President Donald Trump's tariff policy. We'll get into that, and later we'll talk about the Creekshed Project, where almost a dozen Florida writers such as Diane Roberts, Jack Davis, and Gary Mormino are exploring the human and natural stories flowing into the Gulf of Mexico / Gulf of America. But first, joining us live via Zoom from Tallahassee to discuss the situation regarding Hope, Florida, is my Florida Phoenix colleague, Christine Sexton, who has been reporting about this the last couple of weeks. Good morning, Christine.
Good morning. How are you?
Great to have you on here with us. Thank you, Christine, very much. So I want to give our listeners, and I really wanted to talk about this because obviously in Tallahassee, this is the topic. I mean, yesterday you had the tragic shooting up there in Florida State University. That has really taken over the news coverage the last 24 hours. But politically, this story about Hope, Florida, and for our listeners, let's just tell you a little bit about this. This is the organization that's been led by Florida's First Lady, Casey DeSantis. And Hope Florida's mission, if you go to its website, it says a community collaboration between the public and private sector, faith-based communities, and nonprofits to help people basically get back on their feet. Well, earlier this week, we learned in a committee meeting that the Hope Florida Foundation, which is the fundraising arm of the program spearheaded by Mrs. DeSantis, did not file tax forms, didn't follow its own bylaws for approving grants, and didn't follow state laws requiring open meetings. Then there's also this question of the appropriateness of the group receiving a $10 million, quote, donation as part of a settlement between the state's Agency for Healthcare Administration and Centene, a Medicaid managed care vendor for the state. The Hope Florida Foundation then gave that $10 million to two $5 million grants to two nonprofit organizations called Securing Florida's Future, that was chaired by Mark Wilson, who's the chairman of the Florida Chamber of Commerce, and Save Our Society from Drugs. Is that pretty much, in terms of, we'll get into like the ramifications of this, Christine, but that's, that's the facts of what have happened so far. Am I missing something here?
No, it's a pretty tangled web, and you've got it right. That's what we know so far. I wouldn't be surprised what else we learned, though. The House is really tenacious in looking into these issues and Hope Florida Foundation's money, where it's coming from and who it's going to.
Yeah, and we've seen Governor Ron DeSantis react very defensively to all of this. He's been lashing out at House Speaker Perez, Andrade, the man who's been chairing the committee, and all these House Republicans. And, your thoughts about that, Christine, because it does seem, and I was just telling this to my colleague Ray before we went on the air here, again, looking at this objectively, without getting to the politics of it all, there is something obviously to look at here. Whatever you can love Ron DeSantis, but in terms of the taxpayer dollars here, the fact is, and this was exposed in the bill analysis of this bill to get Hope Florida into the executive office of the governor, that they haven't been doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? In terms of like the way to working with the state, they do seem to be kind of unaccountable for some of the things they've been up to the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, just simple bylaws, tax forms, procedures, conflict of interest documents, just simple things that boards should have. None of those were in place. And then, of course, the IRS 990 form was never made public. And the 990 form is what the government uses to track what these foundations collect and spend. So the foundation had been delinquent in posting its first required 990 form for the 23-24 state fiscal year. So they did get that up this week. And the board did meet this Hope Foundation Board of Directors did have a meeting this week, actually 2 of them, and there's a little story there within itself, but the forms are out there. They're, they've gone over their requirements and they've gone over the 990 form, and that's where we're at there too.
Again, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Skinny here on WMNF. I'm Mitch Perry with Ray Rowe. We're speaking with Christine Sexton, reporter for the Florida Phoenix, my publication. Christine, of course, has been covering news in Tallahassee for decades up in the state capitol. And there was the executive, somebody resigned the other day from Hope, Florida. Who was that?
Yeah, so we have a couple of different resignations going on. The most recent resignation was actually an attorney who was helping the Hope Florida Foundation fill out its requisite paperwork. And Andrade had issues with the attorney because the attorney is tied to one of the funds that got money from Hope Florida. So that was a resignation. Another board, now that's just an attorney who was helping them. Then we had a board member, Jake Farmer, resigned from the board. Not too sure when he resigned. And then actually the Hope Florida executive director, if you will. Now he's the executive director of the program, not the foundation. He had put in a resignation letter, but when he testified in a House meeting, he didn't announce that he had already put in his resignation, and that was odd.
Yeah.
He identified himself as the director, but never told lawmakers that he was resigning.
Yeah, that was very odd. Absolutely. Now, I saw, Wednesday afternoon, House Speaker Daniel Perez had a had a news availability with reporters reacting to Governor DeSantis' kind of wild assertions that he's been making this week, saying a lot of different things. We won't even get into that, though. He's obviously very angry at Perez and House Republicans and Andrade, Michelle Salzman, all these conservative folks, actually, who are trying to, hold the state, hold them accountable, hold Florida accountable. One would think that he's, a little too defensive on this whole thing. Now, I thought it was interesting, Christine, because as we all know, the legislative session is scheduled to end in 2 weeks. Now, it may go longer if they can't come up with a budget in time. But House Speaker Perez said that the investigations are not going to end necessarily in 2 weeks. They probably won't, because it seems like there's so much more to unfold here and learn here. And he said, I'm not taking my box back to Miami until, my term ends, which is November of 2026. I know I'm not going to ask you for predictions because nobody knows how this is really going to go here, but it does seem that, there's not going to be any, running out the clock here, right? And the next, so maybe just get to May 2nd, and then DeSantis can feel, a sigh of relief that this is over, quote unquote. It does seem that their intent, because they're being attacked here. Ron DeSantis is attacking people like Perez and Andrade, et cetera, that they're going to continue to look at this for as long as it takes.
Yeah, this is not going away anytime soon. And first of all, they've also asked for Attorney General, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi to investigate it, because I think what's important to understand is the money is Medicaid dollars.
Yeah.
And so Medicaid dollars are funded jointly by the state and federal government. But so there's a reason the federal government should be concerned about this, as well as the state government. Some leading Democrats are asking, even some state attorneys here in Florida to take a look at it. This is not going away because of the amount of money involved, where the money is coming from, and just, overall what appears to be ill will between the governor and the House. That's definitely part of this mix. But really, at the end of the day, the House is saying there was a $67 million settlement that we didn't know about it. $10 million of that we're going to put into the Hope Florida Foundation, and none of this would have come out if it wasn't for reporting by the Miami Herald and the Tampa Bay Times. And it's just not going away. There's a lot of money here. That and the governor, he thinks that they're just attacking this because they're threatened by a potential run by First Lady Casey DeSantis. So he's saying it's political and it's a smear campaign, but House leadership is saying, look, this is a lot of money and you're not being transparent, and we're going to get to the, down to the answers. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I guess we'll leave it there. There's, again, the important thing for our listeners to take with us from this interview here is, as you just said, this is going to continue to go on. Whether it's the U.S. Attorney in the Northern District of Florida, whether it's a U.S. Attorney, Pam Bondi, or maybe they won't pick it up and it will have to be the Florida House that continues to lead the investigation. But they're definitely dug in here, and we'll see how this goes. So, Christine, I want to wish you a happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Christine.
And
thank you. Now the world knows I'm getting older.
Oh, breaking news. None of us are getting older, okay? We all are. But hey, safe travels to Atlanta this weekend, and look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on.
Great to have you. That is Christine Sexton, reporter with the Florida Phoenix, talking about the Hope Florida situation. By the way, we've got a caller here who wants to talk about this. We've got David from Tampa. David, you're on WMNF.
Oh, hey, guys. Yeah, that was great. I really appreciate Florida Phoenix for covering this story, and I think do you guys break that story with Hope Florida?
No, it was the Times, actually. Lawrence Maurer and Alexander Glorioso, husband and wife team, they were the first ones that do this.
Oh, terrific. Well, I just appreciate it. One thing I was thinking about, I think that's an advantage of having a GOP supermajority, and now apparently, that the legislators have grown a spine, apparently. But
right, yeah.
They're willing to push back on DeSantis and hopefully override some of these vetoes that apparently are coming. And I just think that's the ultimate rebuke of DeSantis, and I just think he's a garbage politician. I can't stand him. So, yeah, just really, really pleased that they're pushing back on him.
It is something we haven't seen in the 6.5 years he's been there. That is for certain. David, thanks so much for the phone call.
Sure.
Okay, so, and, by the way, I will be, a couple more weeks of the session, and then I'm going to be back for good here, and then we're going to really get into a lot. There's so much going up there in Tallahassee that I think you, the listeners, really need to know about. Hopefully you're reading us, the Phoenix, the Times, the Miami Herald, any, state publication. Creative Loafing is picking up a lot of our stories, which is awesome.
Yeah, if you want to find stuff without paywall, you can hit us up.
Yeah, we appreciate that, Ray. Okay, so we're going to pivot, though. Again, we could go on about that a lot, but we have more on the show here. Joining us in the studio is Roberto Torres, who is a local businessman here, entrepreneur du jour. He's been on the Skinny before here. Roberto, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm great. Great to see you in your Yankees hat here with the Yankees in town, of course, at Steinbrenner Field. So we're going to talk about a little federal policy, the tariff issue, which is chaotic. Can we put it that way? Which has been going on right now. And who knows, maybe the last that we've heard is Trump is now going to, stop it all. But you had a meeting. You, of course, Blind Tiger Cafe is one of your signature cafes, coffee shops in Ybor. And how many do you have of those now?
7.
7 of those. Incredible. And so been so successful here. So you hosted a roundtable with Congresswoman Kathy Castor was there on Monday. With some other local members of the business community, small business community, to talk about this. So talk about what was some of the tenor of that discussion.
It was wide opening because I think, from my perspective, I know exactly what costs are. I have this gift and a curse that I'm an accountant by trade. I used to be an auditor. So for other businesses that were around the table, millwork, tea, shoes, shuffleboard equipment, these are a real wrinkle in the way that they show operations. The biggest takeaway that I had was that I didn't want to get on a pulpit or on a soapbox and talk about what a good policy is or what policy is, or fall into this echo chamber of Democrats or Republicans. I actually happen to be a non-political affiliate. I think for us was to highlight what the unintended consequences are of this particular economic policy. And there was actually a professor from the University of Tampa, Dr. Kuhn, and he explained that, back in the 1800s, where there was no systems, computers, accounting records, the easiest way to tax or collect tax for whether it's a federal, municipal, state, or whenever something came from a port of entry, the easiest way was to apply a tariff, collect a tax, and then all the goods and services were distributed from there on. But we don't. This is not who we are today. We have a very efficient system of how to be able to collect local, state, municipal, and federal taxes.
It's a global economy.
Correct.
I mean, that is a fact, and it has been for a while. For better or worse, I know there have been trade deals done, and this is, I guess, the heart of what President Donald Trump is talking about, and the ultimate salvation might be to bring back U.S. manufacturing, and that's a big issue that I know some people champion. Some people on the left, on the unions, right? They would like to see that. But it obviously, like so many things which are going on, the way it's being handled just seems to be, very haphazard. And again, what we are hearing from people all over the country, people in the business community, is the uncertainty of it all and how do you prepare for this. Now, is there any, in terms of like, and you do more than just coffee shops, right? You have retail, like clothing, right?
Yeah. We also have a company that has is a clothing manufacturer, and we decorate screen print T-shirts and do hats and bags and accessories and things like that. And what I think one of the things that I find fascinating was that there is this collective sentiment that we would like to see more manufacturing in the U.S. I think 80% of a survey said that they would like to see more manufacturing, but only 20% will want to work in one of those factories.
And also, as far as latitude lines go, there's not many great ones in the U.S. to grow coffee, right?
Correct. We would love to see an exemption on things that we cannot actually manufacture or grow. For example, coffee or tea, and they were not applied that way. It took us a better part of around 50 to 60 years to get addicted to cheap manufactured foreign goods. And to create this whiplash that we're going to stop that today. I think it's a little bit insensitive to where the supply chain might come from other countries, and those agreements that were already established for a better part of more than 40 years. 80% of the shoes that are consumed in the United States are manufactured in one single country, and that's China, and that's insane. For example, Brazil is the largest producer of coffee in the world. The second one is Vietnam. If you think number one and number two, they might be close or whatever, but if you see the size of Brazil and you see the size of Vietnam, and for them to be number one and number two, that's the only thing that Vietnam has to offer. It's coffee export. So to issue an opinion that perhaps there is a trade deficit, right? That Vietnam doesn't buy enough things from us. They don't have money to buy things from us. They don't have a need to buy, I don't know, computers or perhaps flat screen TVs or iPhones, because what they need is more manufacturing equipment so that they can process more coffee, so that they can pump out more coffee.
Again, if you're just tuning in, we're speaking on The Skinny here. Mitch Perry, Ray Rowe, with Roberto Torres, a local businessman here, talking about the whole tariff policy, wherever it's at right now, but the concerns of a local business person like this. You can join the conversation. We're here with him for a few more minutes here, 813-239-9663. You can also send us an email at dj@wmnf.org. And I really do, I mentioned what's the latest here, because it does seem to be changing all the time, frankly. And again, there's that uncertainty here. It's been tough for businesses. Obviously, we have had inflation. And, despite what Joe Biden said last year, it was still a problem. I always go back to the idea that the Democrats were saying last year, it's not as bad as it was in 2022, which was true. We saw the worst inflation in 40 years. But people are still, basically the way I've learned, and I'm certainly no business expert, is the way inflation works. Some of these prices never go back down. And I think some of our favorite products that we were buying 5 years ago, pre-COVID, cost more now, and that's just the way it's going to be. So that was a very potent issue for the president, certainly running, and maybe obviously probably the number one issue, because to quote James Carville, from 1992, is the economy stupid. It really does seem to be a maxim that always has been appropriate. So I think a lot of businesses that was apparently, Trump's kind of ace card in terms of, and I know you're an independent. We've talked about you before. You're kind of, again, it's always great there's so many independents, almost a third of the state, 28%. But yeah, like when reporters want to do stories, we have to know people who like are kind of in the news a little bit to talk to an independent voter. But you are, and I know you in terms of like you are like where the policies are, and I think. Right, Roberto, you would agree with that. Like that was a big argument last year in this election was, the economy, and so that was supposed to be Donald Trump's expertise. And the way, and people will say, well, Donald Trump talked about tariffs, so nobody should be surprised by this. Well, did he talk about it doing it this way? I guess is the question here, because, your thoughts there.
I think everybody thought that a second term was going to look a lot like the first term. And what they didn't understand is that they put a blueprint of what they were going to do, and they started highlighting some of the people that they were going to put in those particular positions in power. So I don't think it should have come as anybody's surprise. He said exactly what he was going to say and do exactly what he wanted to do. But what I heard, literally 2 or 3 months before the election, was he's allowed to bark, not allowed to bite. Or perhaps he's more of a reality TV star, so he's going to say some incendiary things and not perhaps go right through. He wants to be more like a shock jock. And I didn't take it that way. I said, when somebody tells you who they are, you got to believe them.
The famous Maya Angelou line.
So the minute that the minute that the election was settled, I ordered 2 containers of goods from China, one for paper cups and the other one for plastic cups. And to your point about when something happens and when a price goes up, it never goes down. He put a 10% tariff in 2016 that Biden did not repeal.
Right.
There was no incentive for him to take that out. So my 2 little containers of cups were in the water before the inauguration. And the minute that he signed the executive order, he made him retroactively to the day of the election. So guess what? I had to shell out an extra $8,000 for these goods that I now have to eat if I wanted to get out of the port. So again, for somebody that tell me, hey, there's a lot of bark, not necessarily bite, or he's going to say a few things and not necessarily go through it, I think they were sadly mistaken.
You mentioned being feeling like an accountant by trade, and people like that can kind of see the future in front. How does all this uncertainty and stuff affect your staff? 7 cafes, that's a lot of human beings really depending on your decision making. How does that affect you, and what kind of anxiety do you have about that?
I think this idea of tariffs and in the conversation, it's a macroeconomics and a microeconomics lesson that nobody wants to hear. For some people, this is a really, really boring topic because they trust that we have elected officials that are going to check in our best interest and then try to understand what's going to happen. On the flip side, what I've heard is we do not know what his strategy is, but we hope that in the long run we can come out better than where we are today. And my answer to that is that we want to know what the strategy is.
Yeah.
Because if we can agree to a specific strategy, then we can adjust and then try to educate our consumers, our employees, our customers, our vendors, and then share in this short-term pain so that we can sustain a better long-term. I still don't know what the strategy is. And it appears, from what I've seen, that even the Secretary of Commerce doesn't have a specific...
Scott Bessent,
he does not have sort of like this enlightenment, or perhaps he's not owning this piece. This piece is solely being controlled by the president.
And then what's his name? Howard, I forget the other dude who was on television a while, who was kind of, they say one thing and then Trump says something else.
In real time.
Yeah.
Real time, yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned a moment ago about, again, we're speaking with Roberto Torres from Blind Tiger Cafe, a local entrepreneur here in Tampa, talking about the tariff policy, such as it is, cups, you said, from China. So is there anything else that you products you import from China?
Bags, coffee bags, and just like about 3 or 4 other ones that are like hard plastics and everything else. And not necessarily because we don't want to purchase them in America. I think it's because this doesn't exist here. We understood between 1960 and 1990 that they can manufacture a lot of goods very cheaply And they have the equipment and the manufacturing and the space and the people to do it better and faster than we could have ever done it. We would like to see manufacturing come back to the U.S., but the problem is that a lot of those manufacturing plants are going to be robots. They're not going to be people.
That's the whole other discussion about AI, obviously.
Right.
About jobs, about American jobs. And I know, I it is an interesting argument because I think, you could sound unpatriotic, right? If you say, like, you don't want to see some of these places, try to come back in some ways where they can when it comes to manufacturing. And that is a notable goal. And that, in many respects, again, that's the left and the right. I mean, I go back to the 90s on, folks who listen to Democracy Now! At 9 a.m. would hear people like Lori Wallach from Public Watch just decrying the World Trade Organization and the GATT, those agreements, those trade agreements at that time as being not good for Americans, Remember when they had the, what do they call it, the maquiladoras back in the 90s?
Yeah.
That was the thing at that point in terms of when it was just going to Mexico before it was going to China, right? So it is devolved, whatever, our trade policy. And we are, many of us, getting a primer on it if we're aware of it now because of, where we literally buy the things that we use every day. So we're getting an instruction that maybe we weren't prepared for.
Right.
And certainly the markets weren't prepared for, and people's 401ks are paying the price here. So it's massive. So how are you overall, transcending the ups and downs of the economy? Because again, you're not closing anything these days. You seem to be doing still pretty solid.
Yeah. So I think what we do is that we try to prepare in order to come better ahead. And I always say we need to hope for the best and expect the worst. So trying to figure out how we can optimize, renegotiating contracts with our vendors, trying to figure out what the best price is, and then try to be innovative when it comes to goods and services. What is it that we're trying to do for our consumer experience, and how we're trying to do more with less, how we're trying to elevate it, what other lines of business we're looking at. So hospitality, food and beverage, hotels, other cafes, other restaurants, figure out what their pain points are, and then try to provide a solution on that. For example, when I was in San Francisco and I text you like, hey, I'm in your city.
Yeah.
On the airport, on the way to go rent a car, maybe like around 12:30 at night, there was this little booth with a cafe, and there was a robot making coffee. I mean, and he was making really good coffee.
Oh, no.
Wild.
It's not good, people.
Well, let's say, for example, that we have two shifts, right? Somebody comes in at 4 o'clock in the morning and then leaves at 12, and then somebody comes at 12 o'clock and then leaves at 8. But there's a robot that comes in at 9 p.m. and pulls in the shift until 4 o'clock when the next person comes. Instead of having one person there, now you can have a robot. So I immediately talked to my friend that happened to be traveling in China, looking at all the things in the realm of apparel innovation, and talked to like about 3 manufacturers. I mean, that exists today here in the U.S. Have we seen it in Tampa? Not yet, but it's coming.
By the way, you can also in San Francisco get a car with a driverless cars.
Right.
They're omnipresent. I see.
Just don't get stuck in them, right?
I got stuck behind one actually, driving in the Castro district actually at Christmas time. Okay, Roberto, it's great to have you here. It's so insightful for your thoughts there. So we're going to pivot. So again, that was Roberto Torres, from the Blind Tiger Cafe. Owns many restaurants, the great one in Ybor City. So thank you, Roberto. Enjoy the rest of your holiday weekend.
Yeah, have a great holiday. Good to see you guys, and thanks for bringing Roberto Carlos in here. It's good to see you not walk around with Lionel Messi on the field there. Saw you there at the game. So, Mitch, you're visiting us from Tallahassee, right? It's been an incredible session in a way because there has been pushback on oil drilling near reserves. There's been developments as far as making sure we don't develop the state parks. If you're an environmentalist, there's some great stuff. Noah Bookstein is about to file a story about a springs restoration bill and the way it plays with utilities and things like that. There's a lot of that stuff. And with Earth Day on the horizon, the environment is top of mind for a lot of people. It's always on the mind of Dr. Thomas Halleck. He's the professor of English and Literature and Cultural Studies at the University of South Florida, primarily on the St. Petersburg campus, but I know he gets over to Tampa a lot. Together with Eckerd College's Dr. Amanda Hagood, who is an instructor in animal studies at Eckerd College in St. Pete. She teaches environmental humanities there too. Tom, as I've started to call him, because that's what he's asked, has written about Tampa Bay's natural world in this years-long series of columns published under the City Wilds banner. I mean, he had an editor before me. That's how long this has been going on. And over the last couple of years, Halleck and Haggard have been exploring the Bay Area's also so-called creek shed, also a term brought to me by Tom. And the new issue of Creative Loafing Tampa Bay, which is on stands now, is largely devoted to the creek shed, because Halleck and Haggard have assembled this collective of Florida writers to explore the human and natural stories that are draining into the Gulf. And Tom Halleck is here today in the studio, along with Dr. Julie Buckner Armstrong, professor of English and the literature program coordinator at the University of South Florida. Thank you both for being here today on The Skinny.
Oh, we're so happy to be here. Thank you for having us.
It's really great to see you. I feel like I write about you and I see you, and I have your books on my desk and on my bookshelf. Tom's book, Happy Neighborhood, has made it into my family, our life. And but taken plainly, I want to talk about the creek shed. A creek shed might just be considered like a smaller version of a watershed. But your project and this latest big chapter of it, and your past work on this, has really led USF and its archives to really owning the term, I feel like. If you Google creek shed, this morning I Googled, what is the creek shed? And the AI synopsis just pulled up the whole USF creek shed website. So congratulations on that, by the way.
We own a term. Thank you.
And here, well, pop up close to there. Our listeners want to feel you in their brain. Yeah. What does the word creek shed mean to you, Tom? And what should our listeners think of when they hear it?
Hey, we're an estuary. We're on an estuary. We're on one of the, and I think what we really need to be doing is getting into the filaments, into the finer points of the estuary, not just the bay, and not just the river that feeds into the bay, and not just the creeks that feed into the rivers into the bay, but the ditch and the culvert that feeds into the creeks and the rivers and the bay, because it all flows into one system. And, Tampa Bay is really an exciting place to explore estuarine ecologies, but also let's call it estuarine culture. It's where water meets land. It's where the natural meets the cultural.
Yeah, and this creek shed project, it's a community project, essentially. It explores that deep relationship, bigger than the eco stuff, between people and the water systems that surround Tampa Bay. I think I started to become familiar with you because of your columns about paddling Booker Creek through St. Pete. And I was like, that place? People paddle through there? And you just made me see where I live in such a different light. And this latest chapter has one hell of a cast. About a dozen people. You have Pulitzer winners. Gary Mormino is in there. St. Pete's poet laureate Gloria Munoz is in there. This idea really started to fly in your brain after Helene. You realized that these creeks and these streams that you were talking about, we're giving credit to Julie on this, but about how they're making themselves known to us, these places that are around us. I had to read something to think about it. But because of the storms, they were like, waving their hands. Hello, I'm here. You have to deal with me. Julie, can you talk a little bit about that reckoning that you had?
Well, it was very profound with Helene because being Florida man and Florida woman, of course, we went out at high tide after the hurricane to see where the water was coming in an ill-advised walk, very much like many of Tom's ill-advised paddles.
Until the transformers started to pop. That's when.
Really. And, when when you think about water coming in, you often think about it coming from the beach, or flooding. You think about it coming from the beach. You think about it coming from Lansing Park. But we went for a walk and we noticed that the flood waters were really coming in from the creeks and unfortunately from the sewage systems. And that water got within a block of our house, and it was very frightening to think about just how something you pass over every day, you don't really look at, you don't really think about. It's just kind of over there in the back of your yard or the back of your mind, and it makes itself known to you. It comes up. It floods your home. It makes you trapped. It destroys. We have friends who lost their houses, their offices, and things of that nature. And that water, if you're not aware, whether you're aware of it or not, like you said, it makes itself known to you. And that really happened to us with Helene.
Yeah, storms affect our lives in really chaotic and unexpected ways. I'm sure everyone in the studio right now has a story. I mean, our son lost his truck. And if you asked me, it's a series of this, then this, then this, then this, then this. And I don't want to get into it. It's a little too personal, but you can't really say how a hurricane and how climate change and therefore how global warming are going to play out in our lives. It's going to be in really chaotic, unexpected ways. And that's why we've really had a lot of success turning to writers, because I think writers and poets, storytellers have their ear to the ground, their antenna are tuned to the really microscopic details in our lives and how they connect to bigger changes.
I often tell my students in the literature courses and the writing courses that writers and artists are our cultural first responders. They're the ones who give voice and shape and meaning and words and language to the things that are going on in our present day.
I was going to ask you about, how surprised you were, but you're on this tack here about the writers. In the USF archive, the subhead mentions the akphrastic responses to this prompt that you gave to these writers. For us non-literary peons on the ground here, what does akphrastic even mean? And how would you characterize the nature of the work readers will find in this Creekshed launch? Like, what's your pitch? Like, what are we reading in here?
Okay, I'll start. It's a Greek literary term going back to the ancients, and it is a poetic or other written response to a work of art. So it has a very long literary tradition, literary history. Anyone who took a literature survey in high school or college probably came across John Keats' Ode on a Grecian Urn and Truth is Beauty, Beauty Truth, and all of that. So that's a very well-known ekphrastic piece, but it's something that is a lot of contemporary writers like Natasha Trethewey are coming back to this older form to help us understand both the visual and the literary.
And we've been teaming up with USF libraries for these ekphrastic or responsive pieces of writing. And the great thing is that USF Special Collections is just the attic of the Tampa Bay area and increasingly of Florida and the Gulf Coast. And so it's a lot of memory in there. So we have all these pictures and journals and maps and stuff. And we have writers who are able to respond to the stuff. And so it's really able to go into memory. It's really able to dig into the past. And the further we can dig into the past, the more we can kind of get into the present and the future. I'm really grateful to, a little plug here, Ray, I'm really grateful to have an Alt Weekly that allows us to do this kind of deep dive. A little bit off topic, but I think we're going to find that these things have a way of coming right around to the present and being very relevant.
Yeah, I think you and I made a decision very quickly that this is something we were going to pursue no matter what. And now we're really seeing it. And obviously, unfortunately, the storm has brought that to our front door. I want to talk about the archives. I just finally got a chance to have lunch with Andy Hughes, who's pretty much driving over there.
Where'd you have lunch? That's an important question.
We went to Mama's in East Tampa, Soul Food, and it was great. We went Dutch because I am a legitimate journalist, believe it or not.
Yes.
But it was really great. But talk about a little bit more. You called it the attic. There's so much memory in there. But you did ask these writers to connect with something in the archive. Talk about the archive's role, who's at the archive, and how they really kind of tapped in with you guys.
Hey, all the pieces we love, everyone, like I said, it's kind of a dream team. Everyone said yes, and so I was really blown away by that. But our favorite pieces are the ones where the poets and writers they went full nerd on us and dug into the material and dug into the library collection. Cherie L. Greer, spoken word poet, kitchen table poet, dug into Walker's Lake and the history of black leisure in the Tampa Bay area. And not only did the field work, went in search of the sites, but worked with one of our archivists, Amanda Bosar, in USF Special Collections. And then Tyler Gillespie also did a fantastic job. He dug into some videos from the Audubon Society, the really kind of creepy, grainy swamp videos. And he came up with this sort of whacked out story.
Creek
about
Freak
a swamp
is
at
a
Creek
wonderful.
Freak.
I think Creek Freak is my Halloween costume for this year.
And Ray,
for
can
sure.
we remind our listeners?
Absolutely. We're talking to Dr. Julie Buckner Armstrong, professor of English and literature program coordinator at the University of South Florida. Also from USF, Dr. Thomas Halleck, professor of English, literature, and cultural studies there as well. We're talking about Creek Shed. It's a project. The latest chapter of this project takes up most of the book here in the latest Creative Loafing. It's about the waters that flow into Tampa Bay and hence into the Gulf of whatever you want to call the Gulf these
De las
days.
Americas.
Yes. So we're talking about this project, and there's going to be a launch there. But before we get into the launch, I want to talk about, Julie, your contribution to this piece. Yours is a micro-history with music. It's called Father John Crossing the Gandy.
Right.
Timely right now. We have a new bridge also, right? And at the time, the Gandy was new. It was inspired by this event in 1927. Father John Culmer, I think is how you pronounce his name.
Correct.
He was driving across that bridge from Tampa to St. Petersburg. His mission to bring the Eucharist to Black Episcopalians denied a place at God's white-only table. Can you talk to us about why you chose that work, its particular form, and what it was like to have this kind of come out of you for this project?
Wow, thank you. That's a very good question. Tom and I go to church at St. Augustine's Episcopal on 26th Avenue South in St. Petersburg, historically Black Episcopal Church, and it was founded by Father John Culmer. So he is one of our forefathers in our church. And when Tom first started talking about the Creek Shed, I had often wondered about, what it would have been like to be Father John Culmer, who was the priest at St. James over in Tampa. And, when he makes that drive in 1927 from Tampa into St. Petersburg, like, what roads did he take and how did he go and what was going through his mind as he traveled from one place to another to found what would eventually become a church. And so I did some research on Father John Culmer. He goes on to be a very important, he moves to Miami, goes on to be a very important figure in Miami civil rights history and in Episcopalian church history as well. So he was always been a figure of fascination to me. So I wanted to tell that story about what is he maybe thinking, what's going through his mind. And I tied it in not just to an image of a car crossing the Gandy Bridge, same kind of year, 1927 model car. I tied it into a song, Lift Every Voice and Sing by James Weldon Johnson, originally from Florida, from Jacksonville. That song is known as the colloquially as the Negro National Anthem. It is also the name of the hymnal we use at St. Augustine. So I tried to bring all these pieces together. And so the piece intersperses a little church history and a little musical interlude on each.
And civil rights.
And civil rights, of course. It's always about civil rights.
Right. That is your background, right? Is writing about that.
Right. Very much so.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. You have. I've read much of your work about the buried cemeteries underneath Tropicana Field and around that site, and obviously with the new documentary about that site, that's all really coming to light. And that is your background. You talked about going to church. This is obviously an art piece in a way. You're a scholar. Talk about what it feels like as a creative person to be able to bring some of your spirituality to a piece, and the freedom to do that.
Oh, that's a really awesome question. Within academic circles, I think especially within white academic circles, people don't really talk about their religion or spirituality. It's almost like I don't want to say forbidden or a taboo. It's just not something you typically talk about because you're academic, you're objective, you're secular, those kinds of things. But Tom and I we've discussed this a lot, that in some instances with other colleagues, maybe in African American studies, it's very commonplace to, not have such a divide between your spirituality and your church going. It's okay to admit that you're an academic who also goes to church, and so we've been going to St. Augustine's for 15 years now, and it's a very big part of our lives. the religious practice and the spirituality that we get from that is a very big part of our lives. And I found it very important to be able to celebrate that. You just don't do that in your academic writing very often.
And to build connection also. It's one of I forget how many dozens of churches that were removed when the interstate and Tropicana Field came in. It was moved in the 70s or late 70s, I believe. It used to be on 16th Street, right just south of the interstate, so it got moved. And so I think it's very much part of the community and the history of the place.
Yeah, for me, I can't separate out the intellectual part of me with the parent part of me, with the church-going part of me, with the human part of me. It's all part of the same thing. So this is a way to bring all those aspects together.
Again, if you're just tuning in right now, you're listening to Skinny here in WMNF. Mitch Perry with Ray Rowe. We're speaking with Thomas Hallock, as well as Julie Buckner Armstrong, professors at University of South Florida, St. Petersburg, talking about this project that you can read more about in Creative Loafing. I want to ask you folks, if I could, though, about what's going on in higher education right now in terms of our federal government. And we're seeing the University, Harvard University, kind of fighting back right now. The Trump administration is cracking down on these universities, threatening monies if they don't change their policies. Specifically, they say about anti-Semitism on campus, but it seems to be going beyond that now. There's so many things that are going on obviously with our federal government right now, but as longtime academics, I'd love to get your perspective about what's happening right now.
That is the Empire theme for those of you that need the reminder, of course.
The March of Darth Vader.
For years, we always heard, what's going on in your classroom, it's never going to affect you. What's going on in your research is never going to affect you. And what really scares me in the past couple of weeks is that line is beginning to be broached. In that syllabi in general education curriculum are being monitored increasingly. And there are words you cannot use, and it's kind of absurd. You can't use words like
climate change.
Climate change, yeah. I've thought about this. The project is called What Are the Human and Natural Stories That Drain into the Gulf of Mexico? And I guess I have three choices. One, I could capitulate and say Gulf of America, and that's not going to come out of my mouth except in this context. Mm-hmm. We could just say the Gulf, which, by the way, actually sounds better. Right. Drains into the Gulf. Everyone knows what Gulf it is. But is the project going to get axed or changed if we say the Gulf of Mexico? And I was talking to my colleague, Natalie Santos-Pico, poet at USF, and one thing we can't believe is this really what we've been brought down to? What I am calling the Gulf of Mexico? And, the bar is set so low. Sometimes I wonder if we're just a distraction from many broader issues. Is this a sideshow?
Your thoughts?
Well, it's a very frightening time because, as Tom said, that it comes in, authoritarianism creeps in incrementally. So at first there are these rules about what you can teach, and so we had to have a line in our syllabi about we're presenting these as ideas and we're presenting multiple points of view, and that's what one does in college, and that's fine, and we have to be balanced and so forth. It's okay, well, we'll do that. Well, then the next line is we're going to get rid of certain courses in the general education curriculum because they discuss topics that we do not want to be that people in power don't want to be discussed, like literature of climate change or literature and race and ethnicity. Those are being removed from the general education curriculum. And so then you cross that line. And then there's another line, which is, okay, there's a list of words from the federal government that are being purged from websites and are being wiped out. So you have to wipe out words like diversity from everything. Mm-hmm. And then the next line is, well, we're going to be doing keyword searches on your syllabi, and then we're going to be now looking at your research. I mean, gosh, that's a scare tactic. Anybody can Google my name, use AI, and come up with a list of whatever. It's not a secret that I write about civil rights movement literature,
And we've already felt the impact just in terms of having high school and middle school kids now coming into our college classrooms. last semester, not this one, I assigned a very famous narrative, the narrative of Frederick Douglass. And I said, what were your thoughts on the narrative of Frederick Douglass? And one student who had never really had much discussion or conversation or class content on the topic of slavery raised his hand. The guy was white, very good student, said, I didn't realize slavery was that bad. Like, dang, that's where we are? Slavery was harsh. Wow. And I think
but did you feel like that student was able to have a good, healthy conversation after that?
Oh, I think our students absolutely 100% crave challenging conversations. They are not coming to a university to be presented with limited perspectives. And this is the case where there is a very vociferous minority outside saying what they think the students should be learning. Our students want to know, they want to hear, they want to be challenged. Our students have absolutely risen to the occasion.
There's been such a attack on universities, right? I mean, if you didn't know much, just read the mainstream press about how the Trump administration is reacting to they're doing this, specifically maybe about, anti-Semitism and what's happened in some of these Ivy League schools, for example. But it's there's 60 schools, right? At one point they're being examined. I believe USF, actually.
USF is one.
Absolutely. Yes. Right. But, going beyond that, you mentioned, of course, DEI, you've got to strip that. There was a USF administrator who lost his gig recently when it was revealed that he was saying, we do it this other way. We don't have to say deal. So, do you feel as university professors, I mean, I think you're very well established. You've had great careers. You're living in, St. Petersburg, Florida, which is a beautiful place. So maybe, you're not as vulnerable as others, maybe younger coming into the system who want to teach what you guys have been doing about at least our current situation right now, which is going to be for 4 years anyway, in terms of this, frankly, attacks on higher education, it seems like.
I think we have a responsibility because we do have the privilege and we are not vulnerable in the same ways that someone's just starting out in their academic career. And it's our responsibility to name what's going on, to resist it, to give our students the tools for fighting back and for thinking critically. It's our job. It's what we do.
We're in a good spot. I'm 60. Julie's a couple of years older. And we don't have the financial pressure that a lot of our younger colleagues have. We have tenure, so I do feel a kind of moral obligation to use it. One more thing about the silliness of the DEI. In terms of pedagogy or classroom approach, indoctrination doesn't work. I can't tell a student what to think. If I say you should do this, I'm going to get 100% on the opposite. That's human nature. We're dealing with 18-year-olds. Their job is to rebel against what I say. So it's kind of silly.
Let me try to squeeze in a couple questions here. We have about 2.5 minutes. Tom, your last book, Happy Neighborhood, is very personal. Like I said, I've brought some of it into my life. My son and my wife and I, every night, we talk about our favorite memory of the day, and that's from your book, something you do with your son.
I'm tearing up, Ray.
And your contribution to Creekshed about Sunset Beach is very personal, too. It's called Beach Elegy. They can read it in there, but why did you feel compelled to write that piece and pull the veil back so much?
That's a tough one, and that's really working with the Image helped. 2 years ago, this January 2023, I lost a younger member of my family. He was doing the kinds of things that we all did in our early 20s. I'm sure we all have stuff that we're kind of thinking, "Dang, I'm lucky to be alive," and it became about youth and the immortality that one feels at the beach. And as I started looking into it, I started realizing people go to the beach and they do stupid things all the time. It's amazing that any of us are living. And so I really talked about the way in which stories of early death at the beach get silenced. We don't really vocalize the idea. No one goes to the beach to die. That's the point of the poem.
Yeah, it's very poignant. And I know we're running out of time here. There's a launch happening. It's on Tuesday. We can't talk about what stuff costs here, even if it's free. But real quick, next Tuesday at St. Pete, it's a mid-afternoon thing. What are people going to see? Rita Youngman's going to be there. She's going to sing a song. But what else, real quick?
Oh, man, we have a all-star lineup. We have Diane Roberts coming down from Tallahassee. We have Cherie L. Greer. We have Pedro El Poeta.
When is this
happening?
Yeah,
so it's Tuesday at the Nelson Pointer Library.
Nelson Pointer Library, which is on the USF campus. campus in St. Petersburg. You can't miss
what
it. 4 o'clock to 5:30, and there will be refreshments for which I won't talk about fee, but you don't have to worry about anything.
And we would like to thank our sponsors, the Frank E. Duckwall Foundation. I'm the Duckwall Professor of Florida Studies at this moment, and we're very grateful to their support and their help.
We're very grateful to both of you, Dr. Julie Buckner Armstrong, Dr. Thomas Halleck. Awesome English professors at the University of South Florida. I'm just going to say it like that. Roberto Torres from Blind Tiger, thank you so much for joining us. Christine Sexton from the Florida Phoenix, happy birthday to you. And thank you for joining us. Mitch, it's really great to see you back here in the studio. I know we're going to lose you next week, but you'll be back soon if they don't extend this session. Joe Remo on the phones, thank you so much. Skip Sassy on our boards. Joellen Schilke, the hostess who loves you the mostest, awaits you in Studio One. Thank you for listening to WMNF Tampa. Art in Your Ear is next. Stay rizzed up.